We're live. Okay. Good to be back. So we are at the fourth session of this symposium. We will have coffee at the break. Thank you for coming back without the coffee, and I especially thank all the Italian people in the jury for coming back without the coffee. So this session is about science and socio-economy. So we will start with Matthieu Weiss, and we will continue with Nikita Rose. We will have a break with a coffee, and we will finish with Esther and Margot. So as I said before, Esther and Margot, their presentation is fully private. So you will only be able to see the presentation of Matthieu and Nikita. And then you will be able also to participate to the presentation of Zoe, Alice, and Celine, and especially Alice, who is here with us, a Blue Manager student. Donc, in this session, we have in the jury Daniel, that I think some of you know. She's research engineer at Université Côte d'Azur, Irkan Uberbonfond, the CEO of Darwin Evolution, and Adrien Comte, who is online, as usual. The presenter will be able to see it, but not you. Hello, Adrien. Adrien is from, in French, IRD, so l'Institut de Recherche sur le Développement at Brest. And these are, of course, professors at ECOSI, the Université Côte d'Azur. The members of the reviewers of the presentations, I would like to thank them for the time they invested into that. Dominique Adriens from Ghent University, Aldi Daniel, Hubert Bonnefond, Adrien Comte, also Timothée Cook from the SITS, Antoine Mangin from IPSD, and Frédéric Villers from OFB, the French agency. Matthieu, time to shine. So just when you present, you will see that you have a frame of the camera if you can stay within during your presentation, and mind the cables to not fall during the presentation. A lot of things to handle at the same time. You have the floor.
Hello everyone and good afternoon. So I'm Matthieu Weiss, and today I will present my master thesis on a collaborative platform for ocean experts. So to give some context, we go first on the history of digital professional networks. Started in 1979 with the first forum dedicated to scientific articles and debate around it. In 1988, the Internet Relay Chat, so-called ERT, was implemented to the first forum to create direct interactions for professionals. And in 2003, LinkedIn was created around the idea of expert profiles focus instead of the information focus. So today, hundreds of professional networks are spread around the web, leading to a fragmentation of communities. And Blue Komune aimed to become the platform of reference for ocean experts. And the platform is divided around three main functionalities. The first one is a directory where you can find professionals based on their field of activity and interest. The second one is called knowledge. It's where you can find basically all the ocean news. And the last one is called the Ocean Marketplace, also called Action, and where you can launch your project directly on the platform. So now that we know the framework of the platform, we need to focus on field of activity. And we decided to focus first on students as they are part of the hyper-connected generation, and also on marine protected areas. These are an important tool as they're creating preservation and management for over marine domains with 18,000 MPAs worldwide today. What you can see on the figure 1 is the global expansion of MPAs during 21 years current that we multiplied by close to 6. And few events have shaped this expansion. For example, in 2006, can be related to the global pressure around the preservation and particularly with the COP7. And in 2015, it was the launch of the United Nations Sustainable Goals, also called SDGs. So based on the data, we want to we determine hypotheses around MPAs and students. We want to determine if MPAs serve as a gateway for engaging ocean experts, as well as for the students, but also for peer-to-peer leverage. So with the two hypotheses, we're able to determine the relevance of each market entry points, as well after retrieve data. We decided to use the Lean Startup methodology developed by Eric Ries with the idea that a startup may go through 6 key stages to be a viable venture. The methodology is probably inspired from the PDCA developed in 1950. And the first stage concerned the idea of a project for the platform. It was mainly about the innovative method for collaboration, as well as to simplify interaction for professionals. The second stage is called build. It's when you are creating a platform with the implementation of coding, etc. And when you're analyzing the best ideas to implement. The third stage is called project. It's when your platform is already developed and what we call a minimum valuable project. You can find inside all the primary functionalities, but it needs some updates thanks to feedback. In January 2024, Blue Komune was at the stage 4 called measure. It's when you are making assumptions about the market and also hypothesis, and you will develop some techniques to validate or invalidate this hypothesis. So we decided to use for MPAs and students 2 different ways of prospection techniques for digital and face-to-face one. Concerning MPAs, we choose 2 digital prospection that refers to a mass prospection online. So the mailing and the LinkedIn focusing on MPAs and partners, as well as all the staff. Concerning students, we wanted to develop a dedicated tool, so a student ambassador program, with the main objective to reach 1 student per country or region that will bring their own network on the platform, as well as give feedbacks and test the functionalities. Concerning the face-to-face, it's going to be different, as it is less self-explanatory. So we choose the Monaco Ocean Week for MPAs with 3 conference targeted that are open in invitation only. And the global aim was to retrieve fast and constructive feedbacks directly, as well as the new users. And concerning students, we were able to have a presentation of 45 minutes to the University of Monaco to present all the functionalities to students, as well as the benefits they can have with it, and to catch new users, potential ambassadors, as well as feedbacks. So here's our digital prospection results. You can see that we focus on the LinkedIn with MPA partners, as well as the student ambassador, with a total of 542 people reached. In the small square that is linked to the student ambassadors is referred to the experts contacted by students. So we reached a low number of responses for MPAs, but at least a 10% response rate was obtained through the student ambassador program, and an even higher number for the professional reached by students. Concerning the new users, no users for MPAs have been reached after our solicitation and answers, but for the students, at least it's still the most promising. We observed a different tendency for the people that have joined the platform but without responding. And MPS partners, at least we reached 8 new members, and finally 1 MPS have joined the platform. So just to sum up, we reached a total of 5.2% conversion rates, which refer to the people that have joined the platform on the people that we have contacted. And the most promising result was from the student ambassador program and the people they contacted. Concerning the face-to-face prospection at the Monaco Ocean Week, 100% of the professionals we targeted have responded to our solicitations, give us feedbacks about the global acceptability of the project, as well as the perspective and the limitations. 3 or 4 of them have joined the platform after a small talk, and most of the experts mentioned the necessity to have access to a feature directly related to data. On the figure 4, you can see the 3 competencies that we attained. So the first one is concerning the Posidonia and the preservation around it. The second one, the coastal resilience. And the last one is about the implementation of aquaculture inside the blue economy. For the Monaco Ocean Week results, these are our 2 tangible results that are these war clouds. The war cloud A refers to the query, what are the main collaborative platform expectation as students, and the second one refers to which functionalities of the platform would you use. And it appears that the term research is the most used by the students, and it refers, after small talk about it, that it refers to the ability to find easily professionals, but also to have access to their data that emerge from their project. At the end of this presentation, 2 students have joined the platform, as well as the community manager of the University of Monaco. So we have seen that thanks to the lean startup methodology, it helps us to create an interesting fieldwork, and we develop hypotheses to test. But sometimes making hypotheses and assumptions limits to think about the project as a whole. So one of the perspectives to be added to this project will be to add more and more hypotheses. Concerning the prospection techniques, so we'll start with MPAs. The digital prospection was, as you said, mass prospection online. So on the literature, you can find that the mass prospection is normally resulting to 2 or less % of conversion rate. So the objective with this prospection will be to create an automatization of this process and to avoid losing time about it. And also to more targeting MPS partners and as well as MPAs, it would be interesting to implement a feature or dedicated tool directly on the platform for professionals inside MPAs. Concerning the face-to-face prospection, we retrieve qualitative data, and attending to conferences can be sometimes not sustainable, for example, and also it can be time and money consuming. So it's required to have a dedicated fund to attend more and more conferences, and it was really promising. But the most promising technique that we use was the student ambassador program. And we see that sometimes students need to have micromanagement. So it's sometimes complicated to add more students, but as it is the most promising techniques, it will be interesting to pursue this program ambassador. For the face-to-face prospection, we have seen that sometimes to have a clear onboarding of students during the presentation and for 45 minutes can be difficult. And also, it's also required to add direct features targeting students such as jobs or internship. So now that we have retrieved some data about the collaborative platform, we have seen that the field is still not enough mature. So the lean startup methodology enables to create a minimum valuable product that can be shifted to another features. And if we want to focus on the data market, as most of the feedbacks were designed around it, it needs a domain-specific approach instead of a global approach like for a collaborative platform. So now, Blue Komune will aim 2 different markets, so the sustainable blue economy one and the expert network industry. They are both growing fields. The objective will be, thanks to AI and dedicated features, to bring data solutions for experts. What you can see on the figure 7 is the global evolution of articles, where you can find the term blue economy as well as genomic or marine protected areas. And both of these fields are in expansion during the 30 years spread. And those domains are sharing common interest about many topics, such as the fisheries, the shipping, the preservation, as well as tourism. And we decided to launch a survey with the database of MPS managers that we have developed before, and to determine their relation to data. So these primary results have been anonymized due to non-disclosure reasons, but the stakeholder one refers to wildlife in Africa. The second one is a museum in Australia. The third one is a city with departments based for preservation. And the last one is the French National Reserve. So first of all, 3 or 4 of them have projects directly related to data, but they have not the same approach split, as some are collector users, another is an aggregator also, and another is a producer of data. And we want also to determine what they are doing with this data. And 3 or 4 of them have shared it, but only with governments. That is showing the current problematic that we have around it about the valorization and the usage of data today. So to conclude, thanks to the lean startup methodology, we're able to create a clear framework and to test our hypotheses. And finally, the MPAs and MPS partners seems to not be the right leverage to engage experts for a collaborative platform. But students have shown a promising results for this. As well, we can also say that the feedbacks that we retrieve from the different prospection techniques have led to a shift around the platform that could be possible thanks to the lean startup methodology and the minimum viable project developed. So we have seen globally that the development of a startup is not the same as a normal company, as it needs to have quick decisions, to save time as well as money. But the global scope have changed of Blue Komune, but even if the scope change, Blue Komune still want to be implemented for a sustainable way of development. So I will thank you for your attention, and I remain at your disposal.
Thank you, Matthieu. So we can go to the questions starting. Oh, you're the last on the line this time? Yes. Aldine, do you want to start the questions? We'll go then to Hubert.
Thanks a lot for this presentation. So my first question will be, in terms of need, do you know what experts need? Because you are developing a huge project. You are full of ambition, so and you want to recruit people to use it, but do you know the need of people?
Yeah, so already on the platform, few projects have been launched, so we can already see what are the projects talking about, etc., and all the professional they want to engage. So for now, mostly it's about the associative sector that have some needs around collaboration for now, and also when we search for MPAs globally and all the partners, we have seen that they have collaboration in the three different domains, so the private sector, the public sector, and the associative sectors. So to create engagement for education, for example, there is needs about it. And
you're talking about needs, okay, collaboration is the key word that pop up. So, but for this collaboration, so which kind of tools you want to provide them, or which kind of tools they need to increase this collaboration or to do this collaboration that you will implement in the platform?
There is no direct feature on the website to for data or for etc. It's only for to connect people. Then after the project are launched outside the platform, or they can still share documents on the platform. And the objective at the end is to have a large database of already projects that have been done to select and without going to every professional, etc. But there is no dedicated tool on the platform to really target needs, specific needs.
Then what would be the difference and the advantage to work on your platform compared to what is existing already?
Yeah, the problematic with the observe is that, first of all, the directory, in most of the country, it's really difficult to identify people. That's really difficult, except for Asia and Africa, for example, for MPAs and MPAs partners. So for the directory, when you go on the website, on the platform, you are sure that you will find based on the location, based on your needs, professional that you want. And what was your other part of the question? It was
what are the advantage of what you are developing compared to what they
For example, for students, there is also the knowledge part. And when we search for news, it's only related to scientific article, for example, etc. So the objective of the platform is also to implement governmental news, associative news, etc. So that's really a dedicated platform for Ocean. And sometimes the information can be, as I said, fragmented in some website, etc. And the objective is to scrap every information to bring it.
You want to do an integrative, you want to provide to the community an integrative sources of knowledge, and okay. But how are you planning to do that?
Sorry?
How are you planning to do that? How you will bring all the data to these people?
First of all, there is the scrapping, but not a scrapping like extracting the information and putting it on the platform with API. There is many API that we develop on the platform for a project and for news as well. And the objective was not to bring all the features at the first time. We want to, based on the feedbacks and the needs of people, to after implement the features requires. So that's why the primary functionalities, as I said, the 3 functionalities are really basics for now, and it was planned to be improved.
Yeah, okay. Fine. I will ask you a question maybe.
Hubert.
How do you explain the low response rate, especially when you do emailing or LinkedIn? The number are finally not very.
Yeah.
Do you have an explanation?
Yeah, when we talk to people during, for example, Monaco Question Week, and they told us, yeah, we have solicitation every day by mailing. We have solicitations by LinkedIn also. On LinkedIn, for example, most of the professionals that have LinkedIn for a few years have most of the 500 connections. So they are not seeing, for example, the message, are not connecting on the website. And also, I think, as I said, for other startups, it has been studied, and the conversion rate was around 2% maximum by mailing. And I think it's the same for the LinkedIn, but we can't. And we use mostly, as you can see, we use mostly LinkedIn as mailing. We launched the 2 techniques at the same time. And it appears that it was easiest to follow the process of acceptation after seeing the message or not via LinkedIn than mailing.
And the same for the students, since the student the answer rates coming from students are quite low, and seems an interesting platform, especially for them. So I'm a little bit surprised about this number. Do you have an explanation?
As I said, I think the collaborative way first is something that is not really developed in the ocean field to create this kind of platform that's kind of new. And also, we have different response rate for the Monaco, for the University of Monaco when we explain to students. And so we observe that people, when we explain the platform face to face, they are more able to join it than just sending a message. So I think for me, it's the most important problematic is that when you are doing this and without creating automatization of that process, it's really complicated to create an interesting mass prospection.
How many people do you expect to target in 3 years, for instance?
For 3 years, nothing has been planned for real, and nothing has planned, but what was expected, it was most about the interaction of the website. It wasn't depending on the number of people on the website first. It was much more on how they interact on it. And what we have seen about the project that have been launched is that people are not really interacting on it. So that was the main problematic that we faced, that we engaged to shift into the data market.
For you. Maybe we will come back. Louisa and then Adrien online.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation. It's very interesting to see how this interaction MPA students, and so you focused mostly on MPA managers, if I understand, and students. So if you had to do it again on a wider scale, which other stakeholders, for example, would you like to involve concerning the role of MPAs in the ocean protection and science?
First, as we have seen on the platform today, most of the projects are launched by the associative sector. So I will focus first on the associative sector. And we also have an interesting talk with an association based in Sri Lanka, where MPAs are not well developed there, and they are cleaning beach, etc. And they told us that even on site, they don't have interaction with MPAs. So first of all, it would be interesting to connect the associative sectors, and some of this associative sector have access to their own network to MPS experts or MPS partners, etc. So it would be, I think, a most interesting leverage.
And then another question, but more curiosity. when you do this bibliographic search about forcing the scientific literature within Blue Economy and MPAs, you choose to use the keyword genomic and bioprotective areas.
They link it, in the article, and they just wanted to add in the article also the biological part. So, but at the end, the objective was to determine if the Blue Economy can be linked to the MPA managers, and if we can launch a survey about it. That was the main expectations about it.
Okay, Adrien.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks a lot for this presentation. So I have a couple of questions. So I think this is a very nice idea, but I was wondering about the feasibility and the kind of data that you want to put in the platform and the data storage need, because if you want to, for instance, get into the platform data on MPAs, that might be geographic data, which is very heavy. So if you have thoughts about that.
Yeah, so for the data feature, it will be around, like you said, for geography. So when you will search for your interest for geographies, you can put keywords on the website, and through the AI, you find the article links to it. But for now, it's still in development. It's still in early stage of the future of the platform. And the feature will be for sure updated in the few months, as the proof of concept will be emitted in the end of 2024.
Thank you. And what will be the business model for the platform?
Okay, so the first business model for the collaborative platform was planned around sponsorship, so around the platform and also for events. And now the objective will be to create subscriptions with renewal. I still don't have the access to this kind of data, but it will be renewal and yearly ones mostly.
Thank you.
Okay, Matthieu. Yeah, Aldine, back to, I'm sure Aldine has more questions.
So how long did you leave to the person to answer to your, how long did you leave to the people to answer to your email?
What long did you leave?
How long did you leave? I mean, how long?
Okay, so I resent messages, I resent mails. Yeah, I waited 2 weeks instead of relaunch a mail to these people. And we stopped, as you can see, we are 35 people reached by mailing. So we stopped this approach, and to LinkedIn, most of the people that didn't answer the first one didn't open the second. So we launched the first LinkedIn renew, and after 10 or 20 that didn't open it, we focus on the development of the survey for the data market that we already planned.
But before launching some, all this email, and have you thought about doing some advertising regarding your platform first?
Yeah, it was thought, but as I said, it was a shift, an early shift of the platform, and the co-founders decided to plan advertising and communication about the platform, large communication about the platform. But when the data feedbacks arrived and all the data around the conversion and the retention rate, that was the most important, they switched.
So did you propose to use the platform, or to be part of the project to help you develop the platform?
We use the platform, and for students, we propose them to develop also the platform. Our MPS partners, we told them that we require feedbacks, and their feedback will be counted. But for the implementation of features and test, it was mostly for students.
Do you know why, or do you have any idea why a lot of them did not respond to the email?
Yeah, for me, it's they are flooded about mails, and they have to register on the platform. It takes few minutes, And so you have to click on the link, and when you are adding more and more steps to finally reach something, you're losing people during each steps. So for us, that's the main problematic about it.
Did you have any one-to-one, feedback from a person that did not reply by email?
No, we didn't reach on that even reply.
I don't know if Adrien, you will have to add a question to it. We have time for a last question. Couple of questions.
Yeah, so I'm wondering about the data accessibility, and if you've considered this. There's now a movement in the scientific literature about open access, and so I'm wondering, if you have thought about your model and the accessibility of data in your platform.
Okay, so there will be, I think, normally 2 features about this. There will be, I don't know if you already know the website called Cite, using AI for finding scientific articles and something like that. So it will be one of the features that will be referring to that. As also, you can find when you're typing your keywords, you can find also the professional link with the email address or LinkedIn, if they have shared it, or if it's available on open websites. So that will be the 2 ways to retrieve data on the website.
Lisa also have a question.
Yes, I was interested in a more detail, because if I understood well, you did a kind of questionnaire and you sent the link. So it was a Google form image. And so how did you structure the questionnaire? Because I couldn't see, eventually it was the same questionnaire, one for MPAs, one for students.
That wasn't result.
No.
Okay. Yes, we only target MPAs, managers and staff with this one.
Okay.
Yeah, and it was the same questionnaire sent.
How long? How many questions? Which questions?
At least we sent 6 questions at all, but I selected the most important ones about the relation to data. That was the most important idea to determine if they have a need, if they currently have project with data, and what they are doing with this data. And like I said, it's appeared that only governments retrieve the data for the free, and they are part of different part of the world. The stakeholders 2 is from Australia, and the stakeholder 3 and 4 are from France.
Very last question. Yes, I did.
So your last thought, you decided to change kind of all the strategy, reset stuff, so only based on 4 feedback. And
It was based because I'm working currently on the MPAs, but the co-founders also have talked in other conventions or conferences with professionals in the Blue Economy and the expert network, for example. So they also based this on the feedback that they retrieved in this event.
Okay. I think very good, Matthieu. Congratulations. From Cassandra, Nicole, Matthieu, but you will see them on the YouTube. He's not. Okay, good. So let's go for this second presentation with Nikita Rose. I will let you, of course, introduce your subject. You have the next 15 minutes. You have the floor.
Hello, everybody. My name is Nikita Rose, and today I will be discussing my thesis on the topic of integrating marine ecosystem service valuation models into marine finance mechanisms by using a case study in Simakora Mayotte. So first, I'd like to define an ecosystem service. These are natural capital derived from ecosystems that benefit society. And this can include coastal protection, tourism and recreation, blue carbon, and food provisioning, and many more. Marine conservation projects such as MPAs serve as important tools for protecting these ecosystems and their associated services, although they face 2 main problems. The first of which is a funding gap, which results in insufficient budgets for project management, monitoring, and data acquisition. The second is a lack of reliable KPIs or key performance indicators, which often rely on project updates and data acquisition, which can prove to be too expensive. And with either of these, conservation projects often face a lack of access to investors and finance mechanisms. Which brings me to Eversea. Eversea is the company that I conducted my thesis with, and they are a startup trying to create an online platform to bridge the gap between project holders for marine conservation projects and investors. And they do this through a few simplified steps, some of which include project sourcing, impact measurement, and transparency. Although today we're just going to be focusing on an aspect of impact measurement, which is the utilization of a tool known as ecosystem service valuation models. And this brings me to INVEST, or the Integrated Valuation of Ecosystem Services and Trade-offs. This is an open source tool that was created by Stanford University that contains a variety of ecosystem service models. Just to give you a summary, these models each contain a variety of input data, a large amount of input data, ranging from biophysical data to socioeconomic data. Some of the marine-related ecosystem services that it contains includes coastal protection, recreation, coastal blue carbon, and habitat quality. And each of these models produces monetary and non-monetary outputs. Although today we're just going to be focusing on the coastal blue carbon model, which produces non-monetary outputs related to carbon pool storage and sequestration, and monetary outputs related to the net value of carbon. Today, we're going to be focusing on two aspects of the INVEST model, which is actually going to set us up for our objectives. So firstly, these models are recognized and widely used by the scientific community, but their primary use has been for performance valuations and model comparisons rather than using them as an independent tool for real-world case studies. So our first objective is going to be to assess the independent applicability of the coastal blue carbon model using a real-world case study. Secondly, these models require a significant amount of input data. Although we can potentially use a sensitivity analysis as a tool to analyze the significance of different input parameters to potentially reduce the data acquisition costs. So our second objective is going to be to conduct a sensitivity analysis of this model. And to do this, we are going to use a case study, a real-world case study in partnership with IUC in France that is going to be looking at an ecosystem containing mangroves. Now, what are mangroves? Mangroves are salt-tolerant trees or shrubs that reside in coastal areas, and they contain a variety of ecosystem services, ranging from biodiversity support of a wide range of plant and animal species, coastal protection, buffering against storms and erosion, tourism and recreation, and lastly, we have blue carbon, and mangroves actually stand out as one of the most efficient carbon sinks. And once again, we're going to be focusing on a single ecosystem service of blue carbon in association with the coastal blue carbon model. So our project site is going to be located in Simakora Mayat in the Indian Ocean. And if we zoom in a bit closer, we can see that the project site is located on the west coast. This area of interest is going to be about 18 hectares, containing 3 different mangrove species, all of which face pressures relating to waste, urbanization, and recreation. In order to begin the coastal blue carbon model, we first had to develop an LULC, or land use land class map, to define the different classifications of the land use within the area. And you can see in our LULCP, we have the 3 different mangrove species in green, the associated pressures that we talked about earlier, and other classifications of the land that we found. And as you can see, we have 2 LULC maps. The first, A, is going to represent a baseline year, and B is going to represent a restoration scenario, which we'll talk about in just a moment. So A, our baseline year, is going to represent the current LULC for 2024. And B is going to represent a restoration scenario that expands the mangrove distribution in the area with an expected timeline of 10 years. So this LULC is 2034. To get a better idea of the restoration scenario, we can look at A. There are these light green-gray areas that are indicative of greenfield areas. And greenfield are areas that have been set aside for potential urbanization in the future, although they haven't been urbanized currently. So with our bee restoration scenario, we are taking all of these areas and instead turning them into expansions of the closest mangrove species, increasing the overall mangrove distribution in the area. So within our coastal blue carbon model, we have already discussed that this estimates the carbon stored, the carbon sequestered, and the value of carbon. And in order to simplify the carbon cycle, the model simplifies the 3 carbon pools. The first carbon pool is going to be structured into 2 areas, first of which is the above ground biomass. And this is going to be followed by a second piece, which is the below ground biomass. The second pool is going to be the litter or standing/dead carbon. And our last pool is going to be represented by soil. Now, within the coastal blue carbon model, there are 3 steps. All of these steps contain a variety of equations, although due to time, we're not going to be discussing these right now. And these steps are the estimation of carbon storage, the estimation of carbon emissions, and the valuation of carbon storage. And once again, due to time, although we conducted all 3 steps, we're just going to be focusing on the valuation of carbon storage. And now this brings me to the sensitivity analysis. So we decided to conduct a MARRES method sensitivity analysis, which is a globalized and well-used analysis that calculates something known as the elementary effect, or EE, which is a measure of how much the model outputs change in response to a single parameter changing, while all other parameters of the model remain constant. In order to carry this out, we had to choose some parameters that we would like to test. And these are parameters that have to be placed into the model and are related to carbon. And we decided to focus on 2 of the carbon pools, soil and biomass. And our 4 parameters are initial soil carbon stock, initial biomass carbon stock, soil carbon accumulation, and biomass carbon accumulation. So moving on to our results, first starting with the carbon valuation from the model. The first thing we should note here is that this is in US dollars per hectare, and this net present value is distributed based on the 3 different species of mangrove. So we can see that there is one mangrove species that has a higher net present value compared to the other 2 species. Now, in order to calculate the entirety of the value for the whole mangrove area of this area of interest, we had to take the US dollars per hectare as well as the hectare areage, and we were able to calculate that this area, after the 10-year restoration span, would provide a net present value of $83,600 US. Now, moving on to the MARRES sensitivity analysis. You can see that this analysis was conducted for each of the 3 mangrove species of the model. And we can see the 4 parameters that we previously spoke about are listed in the key. Before we get into the results of the sensitivity analysis, it's first important to define what the different outputs of the sensitivity analysis mean, mu and mu star. Now, mu is the mean of the elementary effect, and it looks at the overall direction of the significance as well as the magnitude. Direction, I mean if it has a positive or negative influence on the model outputs. Now, what's important to note here is that if a parameter has both a positive and negative influence on the model outputs, this can actually cancel each other out, providing an underestimation of the overall sensitivity, which is why it's also important to look at mu star, which is the mean of the absolute elementary effects, and it looks at the magnitude of the changes regardless of the direction. So you don't have the possibility of the direction canceling each other out, but you're not able to see the full direction of the sensitivity, which is why it's also important to look at mu. So moving on to our first species, we can see that there's one parameter that shows significance on the model outputs, and this is soil accumulation. And we can see that the value for both mu and mu star are the same at 5.64. For mu, this indicates that there's a positive average effect on the model outputs in a consistent direction. For mu star, this indicates that there is a relatively high average effect on the model outputs, indicating a strong magnitude. Now, what's also important to note is that both mu and mu star contain error bars, which are products of the sensitivity analysis. For mu star, in red, we can see that the error bar is relatively high, and this indicates that there could be possible variation in this parameter's elementary effect, and thus variation in the magnitude, which is important to keep in mind as we move on to the next species. So for our second mangrove species, we can see that there are no parameters showing significance on the model outputs. And for our third species, we can see that there are 2 parameters showing significance on the model outputs. The first, soil accumulation, we have already seen, although we can see that this significance is lower at 0.33. We also see that biomass accumulation shows influence, and this is the first time we've seen this parameter showing influence, although this is the lowest that we have seen at 0.14. And once again, it's important to note that the error bars for mu star are relatively high, indicating once again that there could be possible variation in the magnitude of influence. So looking at all three species side by side, it's important to note that we did see parameters showing influence, although these parameters and their associated values were not consistent among the three different species, which could indicate that the parameter and output relationships are not uniform across the three different conditions, the condition being the mangrove species. And this indicates that there could be context-dependent significance, meaning that there could be a nonlinear relationship between the parameters and the outputs. So moving on to our discussion, starting with carbon valuation from the model outputs. There are a lot of financial constraints relating to data acquisition and report development, especially in the context of valuing carbon credits for marine conservation projects, which often limits these projects to low-cost developing countries. I'd like to highlight some examples of the valuation of data acquisition, starting with Germany, which is a developed country. And this study anticipated that data acquisition for carbon conservation projects would range between 150,000 to 300,000 euros over the span of 2 to 3 years. Moving on to Brazil, which is a developing country, the North Brazil Shelf Mangrove Project estimated that data acquisition for biomass and soil pools would be about 20,000 US dollars, and this would be followed by an additional 40,000 US dollars for the verification and preparation of the verified carbon standard. And lastly, Vietnam is a developing country, and the Margot and Mangrove Project attempted to utilize carbon credits. They were able to fulfill the value of data acquisition, although they were deterred by the high administrative costs that followed. So taking into account our example in Singapore and Mayotte, following the restoration scenario of 10 years, we anticipated that the total carbon worth would be about 83,600 US dollars. Taking into account the example in Brazil, we would potentially have enough money to cover data acquisition costs, as well as the preparation and verification of an equivalent carbon standard. Although what we would have left is 23,600 US dollars. And is this feasible to cover any additional costs outside of the direct costs associated with the carbon project? Unfortunately, we would not have enough money to cover a single annual salary in Mayotte, which is equivalent to about 34,100 US dollars. In a paper, a study was conducted on identifying investable and non-investable mangrove areas around the world. And they used parameters related to the cost of carbon, the size of the mangrove area, and the cost of data acquisition and implementation. And it was determined based on these parameters that Mayotte was a non-investable carbon area. Moving on to the more sensitivity analysis. We've already identified that field-based data acquisition conservation projects are expensive, labor-intensive, and time-consuming. So we attempted to identify potential parameters that were less or more important by using a sensitivity analysis to potentially prioritize resource allocation for those parameters that are of higher significance. Before we go any further, IPCC has defined a list of tiers for data acquisition. The first tier being the least accurate, as it is based on literature and published data or assumptions. And we can see that the error range for both biomass and soil pools is relatively high. For tier 2, this is a bit more accurate as it's based on country-specific data. Although what's important to note here is that more remote areas may have a data gap, so you may not have access to country-specific data. And lastly, tier 3, it's the most accurate as it's based on site-specific repeated measurements. So despite 2 species showing parameters that have sensitivity values that are higher towards the model outputs, we're unable to confidently allocate any parameter as being more or less significant, as we did not see consistency between the 3 species. And even if we were able to provide conclusive results based on the tiers presented by IPCC with the lower accuracy rates, we may be limiting the carbon credit conveyance towards investors and finance mechanisms. So moving on to our conclusion. We saw that we have faced some challenges with the results of this study. The first being we had uncertainty in the sensitivity analysis, So we weren't able to confidently decrease our data acquisition costs of input parameters. We also saw that there's a lot of high costs associated with carbon projects, and we saw low return with the carbon valuation outputs of the model. This presents the need to further explore the potential of finance mechanisms, especially in the context of blended finance. So looking at more than one finance mechanism together. And there's potential with looking at blue bonds, payment for ecosystem services, as well as ecosystem service and parametric insurances. An example I'd like to go through is that in Guatemala and El Salvador, they attempted to utilize a model similar to Invest. And with this, they were able to develop a potential payment for ecosystem service scheme that combined more than one ecosystem service to potentially value the entire area. There's also something on the rise known as ecosystem credit. I know there's a lot of credits on the rise, but aside from the carbon credit and the biodiversity credit, the ecosystem credit values the entire ecosystem, looking at all of the services that could be added to the entire value. And also looking at some limitations. The first limitation is the largest limitation that we face, but I think it goes hand in hand with what we've seen throughout the entirety of this project, is that although we had a partnership with IUCN, they were unable to provide in-field data because it was too expensive and time-consuming. So we had to rely on literature, and we tried to focus on tier 2 of IPCC's tiers, although MEA is a remote area, so often we had to resort to tier 1 due to a data gap. The coastal blue carbon model also faces limitations, a few of which include that it assumes carbon accumulates linearly within an ecosystem, as well as the land transition from one LULC to another happens instantaneously rather than gradually. And lastly, this was a very technical project, including spatial analyses, programming languages, and also modeling software, which needed a large learning curve and could have led to error. And so with this, I'd like to present some future direction. It's important to continue this project once there is site-specific data that can be available, as IUCN is still working on getting that data for Eversea, as well as the implementation of a potential blended finance scheme and valuing this with the incorporation of other ecosystem services rather than just relying on carbon. And as we've seen, the Invest model has the potential to monetarily value the other ecosystem services outside of carbon sequestration. And with that, I would like to thank the Eversea team, Lionel and David. I've been working for them since July of 2023. They've trusted me a lot with autonomy and this project, and it's been a really, really great experience. And I'd like to thank you all for being here today.
Thank you, Nikita. So we can go with the questions, starting, I think, with an expert, Adrien Pons, online.
Thank you so much. That was a great talk. I got a bit dizzy with the mangrove tree, but that was cool. So my first set of questions is on the carbon monetary value. Could you
The carbon.
Yeah, the monetary value that you used. Could you provide some information on the data source that you used and what are the assumptions behind those numbers?
Yes, so for the development of the model, there's a lot of different types of input parameters that go into the model related to carbon. So the first step is to provide data related to, for example, the current carbon storage dependent on the different species, as well as, like the carbon half-life related to mangroves. I actually have a list of all the different parameters that went into it, but we based the different parameters on the different mangrove species. And then following that, we also had to provide data relating to the value of carbon. So we had to look at the discount rate, the interest rate, as well as the price of carbon, which were all taken from the literature. And we tried to use the most up-to-date values from literature for defining that. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks. So, so my understanding, reading your report, is that you used the social cost of carbon. Is that right?
Yes, the social cost of carbon. That's correct.
Okay, so the social cost of carbon is derived from looking at the money impact of adding 1 ton of carbon to the atmosphere. And is mostly used for policy evaluation and cost-benefit analysis. but here, what you want is to look at the cost benefit of having your approach, your project, and monitoring carbon directly, right?
Yes, exactly.
So maybe you could use sensitivity analysis on this kind of cost that you used, and look at other monetary values like market values, which may be more appropriate than using the social cost of carbon.
For the sensitivity analysis, we only focused on the input parameters relating to carbon sequestration. So the sensitivity analysis wasn't conducted on the pricing of carbon at all, the valuation of carbon, which would be interesting to explore later. But there's actually a division in the Invest model for coastal blue carbon, where you can either just focus on sequestration and storage, or you can add the carbon price. And so when we looked at the cost of carbon, or sorry, when we conducted the sensitivity analysis, we turned off the cost of carbon.
Okay, thank you. Then I have another question on the scenarios, because, and as you've shown in the sensitivity analysis, the carbon accumulates, but your baseline scenario is static. It's just a year, 1 year, but your project scenario is dynamic. It's 2034. Do you think there's
Yes.
a problem here?
I think that there is a problem because for the baseline scenario, we're basing it off of the existing mangrove stands that are there. And as we weren't able to get the actual in-field data from IUCN, we had to rely on literature data, which there's going to be a lot of error with, because I don't actually know what the current carbon storage is in Simacora Mayat. And so this is just based off what I found for other similar stands containing similar species. So I do think that there's a really big error between what we used and what actually is occurring.
Thank you. I have a lot of other questions, but maybe for later.
We can do a tour and come back to you, maybe, Adrien, getting what you do, Louisa, and then going over.
I was very interested in the part where you were talking about the restoration scenario. So my question was, this restoration scenario was intended to restore ecosystem, of course, but also for this carbon storage. So in function also of the differences that you find among species, for example, which species would you counsel to, or how did you choose the species for the restoration?
So for the species that we chose, it was just an expansion of the closest species. So with the areas that are known as the greenfield, we chose to turn those into an expansion of the closest mangrove species.
I didn't understand.
So within proximity, it's just an expansion of the closest mangrove species. So whichever species is closest to that greenfield area, that's what that greenfield area will become. And it's also important to note that the species that was closest to the shore, that species mainly remains at the shore. So it's more realistic just including the two species that were farther away from the shore anyways. But there was no bias with choosing which species, as it was just based on what was already there.
But this part, let's say, of the inland then that you suggest to restore was previously occupied by mangroves, or?
Yeah, so the area that was already defined by the 3 different species for the baseline year, that was already the existing mangrove areage, which we used from talking with IUCN, as well as literature data and maps that we could find to create this LULC for the current year. But the greenfield areas that I identified, those areas don't have any mangroves in them. And they're just areas that are basically blank and set aside for potential urbanization of the area.
The ones that are suggesting for restoration. But do you know if in the past the mangrove were present, if they were lost, or if the environmental conditions are, I mean, if when we talk about restoration, is restoring an ecosystem that was previously present and that was lost. So is this the case, or it's more an expansion of a vegetation for a carbon storage purpose?
So both, but really for the restoration part, this mangrove extent was a lot larger in the past, which is why this organization is working there. But also when we were trying to find maps to figure out where the mangrove extent is currently, there were a lot of maps showing the mangrove area in the past, and you can see the decrease in the distribution of the mangroves.
So what was the cause of this?
The cause, the pressures are mainly the ones that I had put, which are related to anthropogenic causes. So mainly waste from the surrounding area as well as urbanization.
Thank you for your presentation. First, I'm clearly not a specialist of this field, so I maybe will have some question little bit strange, but when I understand the beginning of your presentation, it is quite clear. You say, okay, there is two problems. There is a insufficient budget, funding up, and there is a problem in KPI that I can understand. I can understand. And after you say, okay, we have a model to estimate how we can estimate the effect of the mangrove.
Sure.
And then, okay, this model, I don't know it. I don't know the input value you put in the model, but you show some output. And what do you think about your output? This mu, which is very difficult to understand. So I try to be in the mind of a financial guy. I see your presentation. At what point I was expecting, I don't know, we are able to store 50 tons of CO2 per year and per hectare of mangrove. I don't know, something that I can understand. And you speak about mu, and I was just totally lost. So
Yeah.
I compare with your introduction and I say, okay, but you're very far from a KPI, very easy to understand, and especially if you want to convince someone that is not a specialist like me.
Yeah.
So what is your point of view?
So the point of the sensitivity analysis was to potentially identify input data that would be more or less significant, because as I talked about in the introduction, data acquisition is really expensive, especially for carbon projects. So if there is a possibility of us identifying parameters that have low sensitivity, that you can use literature values and not have much impact on the model outputs, there's the potential of carbon projects being able to limit their data acquisition costs. So that was the point of this project. And we were optimistic that we would be able to find parameters that would have lower sensitivity, because that would be a positive thing for data acquisition of the conservation projects. But with mu and mu star, what we saw instead was that the values for both of these weren't consistent over the 3 different species. And so with that, we couldn't confidently allocate any of the parameters as being more or less significant to potentially cut these costs. So it's not a positive message, but it's an important one, because this model hasn't had a sensitivity analysis conducted for it, whereas other invest models have, and they have been able to identify parameters that are of lower significance that they don't need to use data acquisition to acquire the data for.
At the point in your model or in your system, you are able to give understandable some data that are possibly easy to understand for, I would say, a big part of the world. There is a possibility to have this kind of data or not?
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
In your model, or okay, I understand the objective was a little bit different of what I had in mind, but at the point in your model or in your system, is it possible to have easy reading information for the rest of the world?
Like the simple
Okay, I understand the specificity of your work, but at what point you need to open the communication, especially on a topic like that? And you can't if you stay on your slide 20, very specific. So is it possible at what point?
So for like scientific dissemination to the general public,
Yes.
to simplify the sensitivity analysis, yes, sure. I have already simplified it a lot from what it is, but I know that there's an extension of it that I can simplify even further. You could take out mu and u star and not call them that and instead call them something different, you know, the direction of sensitivity and the magnitude of sensitivity. Focus on that instead. I think that that would be easier to understand. But for the purpose of this study, I really wanted to break apart the sensitivity analysis for everybody here to fully understand what was happening inside of it without going into all of the equations that are behind it as well.
I can follow up on that. Maybe the question from Hubert is maybe more larger than the sensitivity analysis, how this kind of model you're working on can be useful really at the end for taking actions, because you were working on the sensitivity analysis, but more generally, how this model could be useful for taking actions. At what point we give these tools to decision makers?
I think, for example, for this model, this is the first time that I've been able to see that the sensitivity analysis was conducted on this model. And I only did one run through of it with a certain value range. But for example, in the other INVEST model, it was water quality. There are multiple studies that have been conducted on it using the same sensitivity analysis, and they're seeing repeated results. So I think there comes a point with that where you can be able to use the repeated results and attempt to use action by using this as an actually independent tool. But for now, as we've only conducted it once just with my study, I don't think it can be used as an independent tool. I think there needs to be a lot more work because we didn't even have the true values, and also the value ranges that we chose to put into the sensitivity analysis were once again based on literature.
Thank you for this really nice presentation and topics. I have one concern and thing. So there's people in this zone that you choose. And you set up a model, you have this restoration scenario, 10-year, fine. So do you know the growth rate of this population? Do you know the growth rate of
In NAOT.
exactly in the zone?
No, I don't know the growth rate, and that's something to consider when focusing on the areas that have potential urbanization.
Is it a parameter we can integrate in our model?
No, but so this model, it's an open source tool and you can access it from the internet and download it. But if it's not having all of the parameters that you want to look at, you can actually integrate Python to be able to code for other parameters that you want to factor in. Yeah, exactly. And although I was able to code using the sensitivity analysis, my coding skills are not up to the points where I could implement other parameters, but I do think that that's a really good thing to explore. And another thing to note is that Cora, the IUCN project, was they had a restoration scenario that they wanted to implement, but due to, once again, time and funding and, they weren't able to get the actual LULCs to us. So I wasn't able to currently see where the restoration was happening. So the restoration scenario was based on something that we decided to implement just for this project. But once we're able to get the data from IUCN, we can change the true restoration scenario to reflect what's actually happening.
Okay. And what can you imagine to lower down the cost? Which kind of solution can you envisage to lower down the cost of going there and doing actions?
The lower cost of going. Well, as I said, this project was mainly focused on carbon, and carbon projects that are successful are often based on areas that are a lot larger. And Simakora Mayat is a relatively small area. And we knew that going into the project, although we still wanted to use them as a case study. So although we saw that the cost of carbon was really low, there's still the potential of valuing other ecosystem services that we discussed earlier. And there's the potential of utilizing the INVEST models to do this. There's a lot more papers coming out of providing monetary valuations for coastal protection of mangroves, which would be something really interesting to look at if you value all the ecosystem services within that area.
Next question will be, How do you plan to integrate the cultural aspect into the project?
The cultural aspect.
Cultural aspect.
The culture aspect of the project. I'm not quite sure. That's something that we didn't really discuss too much. With the invest models, there is the opportunity to look at cultural valuation as well, which would be something very interesting, especially with the tourism and recreation model, because I know there is a lot of ecotourism there. I think that when you're dealing with conservation projects like this, right now, Eversea is a startup, and this is also a very small NGO located far away. And if you're wanting to work with a project like that, I think it's really important to go to that area and fully understand what's happening. And since Eversea is a startup and this was just a collaboration on this project, there wasn't the ability to go there and see the operations and see the people and everything like that.
So then, one last question.
Yeah.
So, thing is that, okay, you have all this recommendation, so why you never choose something in Caribbean island? I mean, with such models, such project, there is mangrove, there is the restoration to do, there is everything you need, it's closer, it's faster, the connection out there.
Yeah.
So why is it not so far?
But if everybody's always focusing on the easiest areas, then there's always going to be other areas of the world that are left behind.
To start with something because we're developing a concept. So I think maybe all in parallel. So
Yeah.
let's think about that because I think it can help you to solve, I think, some and to remove some I don't know how to say in English, to remove one in your project and your willingness to act and do something. So,
Yeah, exactly. No, I think that's very important as well. You know, when we started this project, we were reaching out to organizations that would potentially partner with us, and we only have a limited time, the 6 months. And so, when we had a project that was ready to work with us, we were happy to have the invitation of a collaboration. And although they weren't able to get the data in time now, there's still the potential of doing it eventually. And I think since there's already a started relationship with them, I think it's important to carry it out. But I think that being able to continue research regarding the sensitivity analyses and the model, it's going to be important to integrate other projects that are, you know, of higher stages in their development of the conservation project, as well as even other ecosystems like coral or seagrass or whatever.
A challenge for you, Adrien, and for you, Nikita. A short question from Adrien to conclude and a short answer from you, please.
Okay.
Adrien.
What do you think about ecosystem credits?
For a short answer, it's going to be help, but
Ecosystem credits. I think it's an interesting idea. I think that a lot of credit schemes are still trying to be developed. Carbon credits took a while and they're still being developed to a stage that's actually applicable. Like, for example, only 20% of global mangroves can benefit from the carbon scheme. But biodiversity credits, they're on the rise, but they still haven't been fully implemented. And so there's still that gap trying to get people to acknowledge the biodiversity credits. And so now you have an ecosystem credit coming behind. But if people still haven't acknowledged these other two credits, I think it's going to be really hard to get people on board for the ecosystem credit.
thank you, Nikita.
Thank you.
Adrien is smiling, so I think he's happy with the answer. Thank you, Nikita. Congratulations. You have so thank you for the message from Fabienne, Margot, Youssef, Nicole, Casson. So thank you. So it's time for a break. You will have a deserved coffee. So Vincent, the coffee is at the salle à manger. So it's upstairs. Just before you leave, it's upstairs inside in the castle. I remind you, after the break at 3, you cannot come back here to continue the private sessions, but you're invited to stay to attend to the presentation of one of the Blue managers, at least from here. It will be in the Salon de Musique, the small room just close to the Salle des Actes. Just follow the coffee and you will see. Okay? Adrien, on prend 15 minutes, on revient vers 3 heures.
Ok, parfait.
For this following online.